The palace of the alien queen was always full of life. Every corner of the grand halls glowed with strange lights, shining crystals from 100 worlds. Soldiers marched in perfect rhythm, their armor reflecting silver fire. Servants hurried between the chambers carrying trays of food or scrolls of information. The queen's empire stretched across many star systems, and her palace was the heart of it all. But that day, everything changed. At first, the sound was small, a sudden cry, sharp and frightened, echoing through the halls. It came from the nursery chamber where the queen's daughters, the young princesses, were being kept under the care of trusted attendants. The cry grew louder, joined by voices of alarm. Guards rushed to the chamber, only to find the attendants kneeling on the floor, pale and trembling. The children were gone. The alien queen entered moments later, her tall form wrapped in her flowing violet robes. Her crown of living crystal pulsed with light, a sign of her emotions. Her eyes, deep and sharp, scanned the room like blades. "Where are my daughters?" Her voice was like thunder shaking the walls. The attendants bowed low, stammering, "Majesty." We turned for a moment. We checked the monitors. The door never opened. And then they were gone. The queen's fury filled the chamber. The crystals on her crown turned blood red. Her guards dropped to one knee, heads lowered, waiting for her command. "Search every corridor," she ordered. "Seal the palace gates. No one leaves until my children are found." The command spread instantly. Alarms rang out. Drones zipped through the halls, scanning every corner. Soldiers moved in tight groups, their weapons ready. Doors were sealed, shields activated, skies patrolled. Nothing like this had ever happened in her reign. The queen's daughters were not only her children, they were the future of her throne. To lose them would be a disaster not only for her but for the stability of the entire empire. The search began. The palace was a maze of beauty and power, carved from stone that seemed alive, glowing with veins of blue light. Guards searched the gardens, the library chambers, the feasting halls. They checked the sleeping quarters, the hidden tunnels, even the vaults below. Yet there was no sign of the princesses. Reports streamed back to the queen. Nothing. No trace, no sound. No one saw them leave. Her hands tightened on the arm of her throne. Her mind swirled with suspicion. Who would dare? Rival houses? Secret enemies? Assassins from beyond her borders? Or perhaps even the humans? The humans had arrived months ago, envoys from a small and fragile world. At first, many in her court laughed at them. Compared to the advanced powers of her empire, Earth seemed weak, almost primitive. But she had allowed a small human group to stay in her palace, part curiosity, part diplomacy. And now, the last trace of her daughter's presence was reported near their quarters. Her heart burned with rage. In a great hall, the queen's voice echoed as she spoke to her captains. "Bring me the human. If he has stolen my daughters, I will tear the truth from him myself." The soldiers obeyed, surrounding the human envoy's chamber. Inside, the human sat quietly, unaware of the storm gathering outside. He was young compared to most envoys, chosen not for power but for something else: his ability to adapt, his calmness. His name was not shouted across the stars, but in that moment, he became the center of the empire's attention. The doors burst open. Dozens of alien guards stormed in, their spears glowing with energy. The human jumped to his feet, startled. "What is happening?" he demanded. His voice carried fear, but also firmness. The lead guard pointed at him. "By order of the queen, you are accused of taking the royal daughters. You will surrender at once." The human froze. "What? No, I don't even—" But before he could finish, a sound broke the tension, a soft sound. A child's sigh. The guards looked around, confused. The queen herself appeared in the doorway, her crown blazing red with fury. Her eyes locked on the human. She took a step forward, then stopped. There, on the human's chest, were her daughters. No one could move. The two alien princesses were curled against the human as if he were the safest place in the galaxy. Their tiny hands clutched his shirt. Their eyes were closed in peaceful sleep. One gave a soft little hum, the kind they made only when truly content. The queen's anger cracked into silence. Her heart raced with disbelief. She had seen her daughters cry in fear when strangers approached. She had seen them cling only to her, their mother. Yet here they were, wrapped around a human, a fragile outsider. The guards shifted uneasily, their weapons lowered. Whispers filled the hall. "Impossible. Why would they? Is it some trick?" The queen's eyes burned into the human. "Explain," she demanded. her voice shaking with both rage and shock. The human raised his hands slowly, careful not to disturb the sleeping children. I don't know. I woke up and they were just here. I didn't take them. I swear, the queen narrowed her eyes. She wanted to rip the truth from him, to believe he had used some hidden human trick. But her daughters' faces told another story. They were not under fear or pain. They were safe. Too safe. Still, suspicion gnawed at her heart. She stepped closer, her robe flowing like storm clouds. The crystals of her crown flickered between red and purple, torn between rage and doubt. She bent down, her hand trembling as she reached for her daughters. The moment her fingers brushed them, the girls stirred and whimpered. Their small hands tightened on the human's chest as if begging not to be taken away. The queen's breath caught. Her daughters, the children of her bloodline, heirs of her throne, did not want her arms. They wanted his. The room was filled with silence heavy as stone. The queen stood frozen, torn between fury and fear, suspicion and something she could not name. Her guards waited for orders, eyes flicking between her and the human. The court servants whispered in disbelief. Finally, the queen straightened. Her voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. This is not over. Guards, do not touch them, but keep the human under watch. He does not leave this room until I say so. The guards obeyed, forming a ring around the chamber. The queen turned, her robe sweeping behind her. Her eyes stayed on the human one last time before she left the hall. She would not show her doubt to the court. Not yet. But in her heart she carried a question she had never thought she would ask. Why do my daughters trust him more than me? That night the palace remained under lockdown. Drones circled the skies. Guards patrolled every hallway. The queen sat alone in her private chamber, her crown dim with unease. She remembered the sight again and again, her children lying safe in the arms of the one she suspected most. It was a mystery. It was an insult. It was also a sign, and though she did not yet understand it, she felt that everything in her empire was about to change. The palace had not been this restless in centuries. Whispers filled the halls like smoke, carried from one chamber to another. The story spread quickly. The lost princesses had been found asleep on the chest of a human. Some courtiers laughed in disbelief. Some muttered dark suspicions. Others lowered their voices, fearing even to speak the truth aloud. For in the empire of the alien queen, words carried weight, and rumors could destroy lives. But the truth could not be hidden. Every servant, every soldier, every noble who had seen the sight in the human's chamber would never forget it. The queen herself paced in her private chamber, her crown dimly glowing with shifting colors. She had dismissed her advisors for the night, wanting to think alone. Her daughters were safe again, guarded closely, but her mind was not at peace. She replayed the scene in her thoughts, their tiny hands gripping the human's chest, their soft whimpers when she tried to take them away. Why? Her daughters were sensitive to emotions. They could feel the truth of people more than words could say. She had seen them cling to her with trust, yet shy away from strangers no matter how kind they seemed. So why had they chosen the human? What did he carry that none of her people did? The queen clenched her fists. She did not like mysteries she could not control. Meanwhile, the human sat alone in his chamber, still under guard. The alien soldiers stood at his door, silent but watchful, their spears humming softly with energy. Inside, he sat on the edge of his bed, his mind racing. He could not believe what had happened. Hours ago, he had been preparing for another long night, reading through his mission notes, wondering how to survive another week in this strange palace where every glance felt like a test. And then, two small shapes had crawled into his room. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but the alien princesses had simply come to him, climbed onto his bed, and fallen asleep against him as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And then the queen herself had stormed in, accusing him of kidnapping them. He rubbed his forehead, sighing. What have I gotten myself into? The next morning, the queen summoned him to the throne hall. The chamber was enormous, built of black stone and glowing pillars that reached up into shadows. The throne stood high on a platform, carved from living crystal that shifted colors with her mood. Rows of alien nobles filled the seats on either side, their eyes sharp and full of suspicion. The human walked in slowly, surrounded by guards. He kept his back straight, though his heart pounded. The queen's voice rang through the hall. "Human, you were found with my daughters in your care. You claim innocence. Today we will see the truth," the nobles murmured among themselves. Some sneered openly at him. Others studied him with quiet curiosity. The queen raised her hand and the murmur stopped. 2 attendants entered the hall carrying the princesses. The little ones blinked sleepily, their eyes wide and innocent. The queen motioned for them to be placed on the ground. "Let us see where they go," she said. The human froze. He understood the test immediately. If the children chose him again, the queen's suspicions would deepen. But if they did not, perhaps he would be spared. The princesses looked around the hall. They saw the nobles, the guards, their own mother upon the throne. Then slowly they turned and their eyes found him. "Not me," the human whispered under his breath. But it was too late. The princesses toddled forward on unsteady legs, ignoring the nobles who reached out to them, ignoring the attendants who called softly. They went straight to the human and clung to his legs, giggling. One of them lifted her arms, demanding to be carried. The hall gasped. The queen's crown flashed red, then purple, then blue. Her emotions battled in silence. The human bent down carefully and lifted the child, her small head resting against his shoulder. The other princess pressed against his leg, clutching his coat. He looked up at the queen helplessly. "I didn't do anything, they just... Come to me." The nobles erupted into argument. "This is a trick," one shouted. "The human has bewitched them," another hissed. "No, the children sense something we do not," a softer voice suggested. The queen silenced them with a single gesture. Her eyes locked on the human, searching him like fire burning through stone. She could see no lie in him, no sign of secret power, only confusion. Only truth, but truth was not enough. She leaned forward on her throne. "You will remain here under my watch. Until I understand this bond, you will not leave the palace. Do you understand, human?" The human nodded quickly. "I understand." "I'll stay." The queen studied him one last time before dismissing him. The princesses had to be pried from his arms by attendants, crying until they were returned later in secret. That evening, the queen called her advisors. "What does this mean?" she demanded. One old counselor bowed low. "Majesty, perhaps the children see something in the human, a quality our kind does not carry." Another hissed, "Or perhaps it is a human trick, some way to climb into your trust and destroy us from within." The queen's eyes flashed. Both answers troubled her, so she devised a plan. If the bond between her daughters and the human was real, it would remain under any test. If it was false, it would break. She would see for herself. The next days were filled with experiments. The princesses were placed with trusted guards. They cried. They were placed with robotic caretakers designed for comfort. They cried louder. They were even placed with the queen herself in private chambers. They clung to her, but soon their small voices called out for the human. When he was brought in, they rushed to him without hesitation. The queen watched all this with growing unease. The nobles whispered constantly. Some demanded the human be thrown into the deepest prison. Others urged her to listen to what the bond might mean. The human, meanwhile, grew more and more nervous. He tried to explain again and again that he had done nothing, that he did not even understand why they came to him. He was just himself. But the queen did not believe in coincidence. One night the queen herself went to the human's chamber. She entered without her guards, her robe dark and plain, her crown dim. The human was awake, reading, and jumped when he saw her. "Majesty?" She raised a hand to silence him. Her eyes searched his face. "My daughters trust you," she said softly. "More than anyone else, why?" The human shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe they feel I mean them no harm. I don't want anything from them. I don't want power, I just..." He hesitated, then shrugged. "I just like them. They're children. They deserve kindness." The queen stared at him for a long time. His words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her. Kindness. It was a word her court rarely used. Power, strength, loyalty. Those were the words of her empire. But kindness? That was something fragile. Something forgotten. She turned without another word and left, her thoughts heavy. From that night on, she watched him secretly. She saw how he never pushed the princesses away even when tired. She saw how he carried them gently, how he made them laugh with silly faces, how he comforted them when they cried. She began to wonder if what her daughters felt was not some trick, but something real. Something that her people, for all their strength and power, had lost long ago. Still, doubt remained in her heart. For if the bond was real, it meant her daughters had chosen a human. And that was something the Empire would never accept easily. The whispers in the palace grew louder. The queen is weak. The human is dangerous. The daughters are bewitched. The queen knew that soon. Her enemies would use this against her, and when they did, both the human and her daughters would be in danger. And so, though she did not yet trust him fully, she made a silent vow. She would test him one last time. A test that would reveal his true heart, for only then would she know if the human was a threat, or something far more important. The alien queen could not rest. Every night she lay awake in her great chamber, her crystal crown dimmed but her thoughts alive. The bond between her daughters and the human puzzled her like nothing else in her long reign. She could not ignore it, and she could not accept it. Her empire was built on strength, discipline, and loyalty. But here was a human, a fragile outsider, who had won the trust of her heirs without trying. It shook the foundations of everything she believed, so the queen decided there must be tests. If the human was tricking her daughters, she would find proof. If he was not, then she would face the harder truth, that perhaps her daughters had chosen him of their own will. The first test was simple. At dawn, the queen ordered the human to meet her in the Hall of Guardians. The vast chamber was filled with her finest soldiers, tall and armored, their eyes glowing beneath their helmets. In the center stood the princesses, surrounded by gifts, toys, and glowing crystals meant to comfort children. The queen's voice rang through the hall. If the bond is real, my daughters will not choose him when given others to turn to. The nobles nodded in agreement. They watched closely, waiting for the human to fail. The human stepped forward nervously, his hands at his sides. He looked at the two little princesses and gave a small smile. "Hey, it's me again." The princesses looked around at the shining gifts, the glittering toys, and even the soldiers who bent down, offering gentle hands. For a moment it seemed they would choose differently, but then, like small comets, they ran to the human and clung to him. One laughed as he lifted her into his arms. The other grabbed his hand, pulling at his sleeve as if afraid he might vanish. The hall filled with gasps. The queen's crown flickered with stormy light. "Again," she commanded. The second test was harder. The human was taken to the training grounds. There he faced trials of skill, speed, and courage. The queen herself watched from above. "You will prove you are not weak," she said. "If you cannot protect yourself, you cannot protect my daughters." The human sighed. He was no soldier. He had come as an envoy, not a warrior. But he nodded. "I'll try." The first trial was a combat drone. It attacked with flashing blades of light, fast and merciless. The human barely avoided the strikes, rolling on the ground, grabbing a broken staff to defend himself. He fought clumsily, but with determination. His arms ached, his chest burned, but he refused to give up. The second trial was a test of endurance. He was forced to run across shifting platforms while drones fired harmless but painful stingers at him. He stumbled, fell, but rose again. His legs were shaking, his lungs screamed, but he kept moving. The third trial was courage. He was locked in a chamber with holographic illusions of fire, collapsing walls and falling stone. Though he knew it was false, the fear was real. He pressed forward anyway, shielding himself with his arms, refusing to turn back. When it was over, he collapsed, gasping for air, covered in bruises and sweat. The nobles laughed at his clumsiness. "Pathetic. He has no grace. Humans are weak." This proves it, but the queen watched silently. Though the human had failed many times, he had never stopped trying. And when the princesses were brought in at the end, they ran to him, hugging him tightly despite his bruised state. They cared nothing for his failures, they cared only for him. The queen's eyes narrowed. This was not what she had expected. The third test was secret. Late one night, the queen gave orders to her hidden guards. The human was taken quietly from his chamber, blindfolded, and brought to a hidden room deep beneath the palace. There he was tied to a chair. Across from him sat the queen herself, cloaked in shadows, her crown dim. "You are accused of bewitching my daughters," she said coldly. "Confess and I will spare you. Refuse and you may never leave this place." The human's heart pounded. He pulled at the ropes, but they held tight. I told you already, I didn't do anything. They just came to me. I don't know why. The queen leaned closer, her eyes glowing faintly. Do not lie to me, human. I will know. The human met her gaze. His voice shook but remained steady. I swear on my life I didn't take them. I didn't cast a spell. I don't even know how to begin doing something like that. I only treated them kindly because they're children. And children should always feel safe. The queen froze. His words struck her again like they had before. So simple, so plain, and yet so powerful. She untied him silently and left the chamber without a word. But the tests did not end. The queen needed certainty. The next day she arranged a cruel trial without telling him. She ordered her guards to create a false danger. A group of masked soldiers stormed the garden where the princesses played with the human. They carried blunt weapons and shouted as if meaning harm. The human had no weapon. He had no training. But when the soldiers rushed forward, his reaction was instant. He threw himself in front of the princesses, shielding them with his own body. Stay back, he shouted. His voice was shaking, but his arms held firm. The soldiers struck at him with their staffs. He took the blows, staggering, but never stepped aside. The princesses cried, clinging to him. Finally, the queen ordered the attack to stop. The human collapsed to his knees, bruised and bleeding, holding the children close. His eyes glared up at her with anger. If you ever put them in danger like that again, I don't care if you're the queen, I'll stop you. The hall went silent. Even the nobles gasped. To speak so boldly, to defy the queen to her face, it was madness. But the queen did not strike him down. She only stared, her heart trembling with something she could not name. That night, the queen sat with her daughters. They clung to her for a while, but soon their small voices called for the human again. She watched them, her chest heavy with emotions she rarely allowed herself to feel. Strength had always been her guiding rule. Power was the foundation of her empire. But perhaps her daughters had seen a different strength. A strength not of weapons, but of heart. The queen whispered softly, though no one could hear. Perhaps he is not my enemy. Perhaps he is something else, but still doubt lingered. For she knew her enemies in the court were already moving. They would use this bond against her. They would say she was weak, unfit, blinded by a human. The true test had yet to come, and when it arrived, it would be far more dangerous than anything she had planned. The palace had never been so tense. Whispers of suspicion and fear filled every hall. Rumors had already begun to spread among the nobles, some claiming the human had bewitched the queen's daughters, others suggesting he might be a secret spy sent to weaken the empire from within. The queen had watched him closely for days, silently assessing his character. And yet she could not deny the truth her daughters displayed. They trusted him. They sought him out. They clung to him as if he were their own. But trust alone would not shield them from the dangers lurking in the shadows. The rival faction had been waiting. While the queen focused on testing the human, they quietly gathered their forces. They envied her power, and some had always viewed her daughters as pawns in a greater game of control. Now they saw an opportunity. If the human truly had a connection with the princesses, they could use that against the queen, either to manipulate her or to seize her throne. It began with small strikes. Supplies were delayed. False alarms were raised. Servants reported strange shadows moving in the palace gardens. At first, the queen dismissed these as minor acts. But the warnings escalated quickly. Finally, the night came when the attackers revealed themselves openly. The human had been resting in his quarters with the princesses asleep beside him. The quiet of the night was shattered by the sound of alarms and distant shouts. The palace gates, though reinforced with energy shields, were under assault by masked soldiers from the rival faction. Guards rushed past him, shouting commands in the alien tongue. The human leapt to his feet. Though he had no weapons and little combat training, he understood immediately what was at stake. The princesses stirred, sensing danger. One of them cried out and clung to his chest while the other reached for his hand, trembling. The human did not panic. He had been tested by the queen in ways he never imagined, but those trials had strengthened him. He felt a deep resolve rise within him. These children were not merely symbols of the queen's power. They were living beings he could not allow to be harmed. He ran to the main corridor as guards and attackers clashed. Energy weapons flared, throwing brilliant blue and red light across the walls. The human shielded the princesses, holding them close as soldiers lunged and swung. Every movement was instinctual, every step calculated to keep them safe. Though he was weaker than any trained soldier, the human's courage made him formidable. He dodged strikes, used walls for cover, and held the princesses protectively. His arms ached, his body burned, but he refused to give up. The queen, watching from the central balcony, felt a surge of both fear and awe. She had trained the strongest warriors in her empire, yet none moved with the same fearless determination. None had risked themselves as completely as the human did. Clutching her daughters against his chest, she realized, with a mix of pride and astonishment, that his bond with her daughters was not a weakness, it was a source of strength. The battle spread through the palace. Courtyards became arenas of chaos, with energy blasts bouncing off walls and guards calling orders in hurried tones. The human pressed forward, never letting go of the princesses. His determination inspired some of the queen's soldiers. A few, previously doubtful of his presence, joined him, rallying to protect the children with renewed fervor. The rival faction, though prepared, had underestimated the human. They had expected fear, hesitation, or perhaps surrender. Instead, they found themselves facing a man who moved with a courage and protective instinct that none of their alien logic could anticipate. At one point, the human reached a collapsed hallway with attackers closing in from both sides. He dropped to the ground, pressing one daughter to his chest and holding the other's hand. "Stay close to me," he whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you." The princesses nodded, their small faces pressed against him. They trusted him completely, their tiny bodies unafraid in his arms. The attackers hesitated. They had never seen such fearless devotion. Even their own warriors faltered at the sight. The queen's voice rang out across the courtyard. "Stop!" Her command was not only a test but also a warning. She wanted to see the human's reaction under pressure. Would he run? Would he abandon her daughters when given a chance? But the human did not flee. He rose, protecting the princesses with his own body, even as energy blades scorched the air around him. "You do not frighten me," he shouted. "My only fear is for them." At that moment, the queen realized the depth of his character. Here was a human, fragile by alien standards, standing against overwhelming odds, not for glory, not for reward, but for the lives of children who were not even his own. The battle reached its climax when the rival leader confronted them directly. A tall, armored warrior stepped forward, energy spear raised. "Surrender, human," he said. "Your death will be quick." The human's eyes met the attackers, and he stood taller than his small frame allowed. "Not my daughters. Not now, not ever." With a roar, he charged, using the narrow hallway to his advantage. The princesses clung tightly to him, and somehow his courage and instinct allowed him to dodge the spear and knock the attacker back. The queen watched in shock and awe. Never had she witnessed such bravery from a human. The little envoy, the one she had doubted, had proven himself more courageous than the strongest warriors in her palace. Finally, the attackers were defeated. The palace guards, inspired by the human's fearless actions, pushed them back and secured the halls. The rival faction had been crushed and peace returned, at least for the moment. The human collapsed to the floor, exhausted and wounded. The princesses immediately climbed onto his chest, clutching him as if he were their only refuge. One whispered softly, "Don't leave us." The queen approached, her crown dim but her eyes bright. She knelt beside him, taking in the sight of the human, bruised and bleeding, with her daughters safe in his arms. For the first time, she spoke not as a ruler, but as a mother. You protected them with your life." The human looked up, exhausted but steady. "I couldn't let anything happen to them. They trusted me, and I trusted them." The queen studied him. Her anger, suspicion, and doubt battled with a strange new emotion: respect, awe, perhaps even gratitude. Her daughters, sensing the tension, giggled softly and hugged him tighter. The human smiled faintly, brushing their hair gently, whispering comforting words. That night, the queen retreated to her private chambers. She pondered what she had witnessed. The human was no ordinary envoy. His bravery, kindness, and instinctive care for her daughters revealed a side of humanity she had never known existed. She knew her court would never understand it. They would whisper that she had allowed an outsider too close, that she had been weak to tolerate him. But she also knew the truth. He had risked everything to protect her children. And for that, he had earned a place in her consideration. Still, questions remained. Could she fully trust him? Could her daughter's bond with a human be something more than instinct? What did it mean for the future of the Empire? The answers would not come easily. The trials were far from over, but one thing was clear. The human had proven himself in a way that no test or threat could ever measure. He had shown courage beyond strength, loyalty beyond command, and a heart that was unbreakable. And her daughters had chosen him without hesitation, without fear. The Queen realized that the coming days would challenge everything she believed. Yet for the first time in her life, she wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, this human might not be her enemy. And in that thought, a new story began. One that would test not only courage and loyalty, but also trust, love, and the power of the human heart. The palace was quiet after the storm. The echoes of battle had faded, leaving only the soft hum of energy shields and the occasional footsteps of guards patrolling the halls. The princesses slept peacefully in the human's arms, their tiny breaths gentle against his chest. He had stayed awake most of the night, watching over them, making sure they were safe. The Queen observed this scene from her private balcony. She felt something unfamiliar, something she had never allowed herself to feel in the long years of ruling her empire. Pride, respect, perhaps even trust. She had tested him in every way she could think of, through trials of strength, endurance, courage, and loyalty. Each time he had proven himself. He had faced dangers she could not have imagined, all to protect her children. And each time her daughters had shown, through their actions, that they chose him above all else. For the first time, the Queen wondered if she had underestimated humanity. The next morning, she summoned the human to her private chambers. He entered carefully, still bearing minor bruises from the previous night's battle, his clothes slightly torn. Yet his posture remained steady, his expression calm. The Queen did not rise from her throne. Her eyes, however, were full of intensity as she studied him. "You have shown courage, loyalty, and strength beyond what I expected from one of your kind," she said softly. "But more than that, you have shown a heart that cannot be measured by strength alone." The human nodded, understanding that this was not a threat. "I only did what I had to. They trusted me and I couldn't let anything happen to them." The Queen leaned forward, her voice gentler than ever before. "You have earned something rare in my court. Trust. Not mine entirely, but something close to it. My daughters, they have chosen you. And that choice cannot be ignored." The human's eyes widened slightly. "You mean, I don't have to leave?" "You may stay," the Queen said, "under my protection. But more importantly, you are to remain a guardian to my daughters, a friend, and perhaps more if that is your wish." The human felt a strange warmth rise within him. He had not expected acceptance, only trials. Yet here it was. Acknowledgement from the most powerful being in the empire, and permission to care for the children he had grown to love so fiercely. In the following days, the palace returned to a careful rhythm. Guards still patrolled diligently, nobles still whispered in the halls, but the human was now officially recognized as a protector of the princesses. The children clung to him freely, and he treated them with patience, kindness, and gentle guidance. The Queen observed these interactions closely. She noticed small gestures that spoke volumes, the way he encouraged them when learning new things, the way he comforted them when frightened, and the way he never sought to control or command, only to guide and protect. It was different from anything she had known in her empire. Her people ruled with strength and command, expecting obedience. But here was a human who ruled with heart, and the results were astonishing. The children were happier, braver, and more confident because of him. Even the Queen's advisors began to notice. Slowly, whispers turned from skepticism to admiration. Some admitted quietly that perhaps the human's bond with the princesses was something to learn from, not fear. One afternoon, a grand assembly was called. The Queen sat on her throne, her crown glowing softly in shades of blue and violet. The human entered the hall holding the princess's hands. They smiled up at him, their trust evident in every glance. The Queen's voice echoed through the chamber. "Today we recognize not only the bravery of our soldiers, but the courage of one human who has proven his worth in ways none could have imagined." Gasps filled the hall. Whispers ran like fire. The human, usually unaccustomed to praise, bowed respectfully. "You have earned your place here," the Queen continued. not as a ruler, not as a warrior, but as a protector of my children and an example to all in this empire." The princesses clapped their tiny hands, giggling, and ran to him. He scooped them up, holding them close, smiling despite the strange attention. That evening, the queen visited the human privately once more. Her expression was thoughtful, softer than ever before. "You have changed something in me," she said quietly. "I have ruled with strength and power for many years, but I have never understood the value of heart. Until I saw what you have done for my daughters." The human looked at her surprised. "I didn't do anything special. I just cared for them. That's all?" "No," she replied firmly. "It is far more than that. You have reminded me that courage is not always measured in battle, and loyalty is not always forced. Sometimes it is chosen, and that is the most powerful bond of all." The human felt a deep respect for the queen grow within him. She was still the ruler, still the strongest being he had ever known, yet she had admitted the truth, that she had learned something from him. Days turned into weeks. The human's bond with the princesses only grew stronger. They followed him happily, laughed with him, and sought comfort in his arms when frightened. Even the queen began to relax, observing from a distance as her children flourished under his care. The palace, once tense with suspicion, now felt lighter. Guards smiled quietly at the human's interactions with the children, and some even asked for advice on how to show kindness in leadership. It became clear that the human had done something extraordinary, not through power, not through weapons, but through courage, heart, and consistency. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of red and gold, the queen found herself standing in the garden where her daughters played. The human sat on the grass, reading softly to them from a small book he had found in the palace library. The princesses listened intently, giggling at the funny voices he made for each character. Occasionally, one would climb onto his lap, resting her head against his chest while the other held his hand. The queen watched silently. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine the future, one where her daughters were safe, happy and free to choose their paths, guided by someone they trusted completely. She realized that the human had done more than protect her daughters. He had reminded her of something she had nearly forgotten, that true strength lies not only in command, but in care, patience, and heart. That night, the human carried the princesses to their chambers. They were tired from the day's play, but still whispered questions about the stories he had read. He answered each one patiently, tucking them into bed gently, brushing their hair and assuring them that he would always be there. The queen observed quietly from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Then quietly she left, giving him privacy. She understood now that he had become part of their lives in a way that could not be undone, and perhaps, she thought, that was exactly as it should be. The palace settled into a new rhythm. The human became a trusted figure, respected for his courage and heart. The queen learned to accept that her daughter's bond with him was genuine, and in time even she began to trust his guidance. The princesses, once frightened by the unfamiliar world around them, now laughed freely, exploring the palace and its wonders with confidence. They clung to him not because he forced them to, but because they wanted to, and in this way, the human, an outsider from a distant world, had changed the course of the empire not with weapons or politics, but with something far more powerful: the courage to care, the bravery to protect, and the heart to love unconditionally. The queen stood in the garden once more, watching the sun rise over her empire. The human walked with her daughters, holding their hands, guiding them gently. She realized that she had learned the most important lesson of her life. Power without heart could rule, but heart with courage could change everything. And in that moment, the alien queen smiled, not as a ruler, not as a warrior, but as a mother who had witnessed the extraordinary strength of humanity. Her daughters were safe. Her empire was intact, and a human, one she had once doubted, had earned a place in their hearts and their lives forever. The future, she knew, was brighter than ever before.